Chapter 4, Early Ojibwe. As we always have on our test, we always have true and false statements to begin our test. These are the true statements for Chapter 4. Number 1. Many places in Minnesota are based on Ojibwe words. And I think that's just a wonderful thing. We don't honor our Native Americans enough, but I think it's wonderful that we do have some places with Ojibwe words. Number 2, the Ojibwe migrated westward from the East Coast. Yes, I have a typo there. It is from the East Coast. And I showed you in the book, and I drew a picture up on the whiteboard of how the Ojibwe were way up there by the St. Lawrence River, on the northeast corner, right on the Atlantic Ocean. That's where they originated. The Dakota, as you remember, they originated here in Minnesota, but the Ojibwe did not. They were out on the east coast, on the Atlantic Ocean, the northeast, and then they migrated westward towards the Minnesota, where the Dakota lived. Number 3, wild rice was harvested in the fall. As we know, right now in the fall, it is a great time where our farmers are harvesting crops. Well, wild rice, even though you can't plant wild rice, you still harvest it in the fall. Number 4, the Dakota and Ojibwe did have some peaceful times. They were not always at war. There were times where they were very peaceful with one another, and at times where they even intermarried. Number 5, Anishinaabe is another name for the Ojibwe people. They called themselves that. Anishinaabe meaning original people, and sometimes they even refer to all Native Americans as Anishinaabe, but the Ojibwe did have another name for themselves, Anishinaabe. Next part of our test is matching. And one side will be half of these things, the other side will be the matching side, but so each statement has the matching part in it. So our first statement is, rice harvesting is a fall activity. So on one side of the test you would see rice harvesting, on the other side you would see fall activity. Those two things match up. Number 2, birch bark canoes are a form of transportation. So one side of the test would say birch bark canoes, you would match it up to form of transportation. That would be on the other side. Number 3, the sugar camp is a village location in the spring. We've talked about sugaring, and sugaring is done in the spring on maple trees. So you would match up sugar camp and village location in the spring. Number 4, a wigwam is a home in the winter for the Ojibwe. You know, the Dakota, we learned it was a teepee, but for the Ojibwe, it was a wigwam. Number 5, lacrosse was a popular team sport. So on one side of the test would be lacrosse, the other side you would match it up with popular team sport. Number 6, the winter season was a time of quiet and seclusion. The winter season was a time of quiet and seclusion. And number 7, the summer season was a time when men traveled and traded. The summer season was a time when men traveled and traded. Those two things would match up. Next slide. List at least 2 pieces of evidence that support the following statement. In many ways, early Ojibwe life was connected to nature. These are some things you could write. The Ojibwe lived near maple groves, rivers, lakes, pine forests, and marshes. Their activities included fishing, hunting, harvesting wild rice, and maple sugaring. And they built their homes from materials found in nature where they lived. Now, kids, there's many ways you could answer this using this information. You can paraphrase and put it down your way. You could say, The Ojibwe lived near Maple Grove so they could do sugaring in the spring, and they lived near rivers and lakes and marshes so they could fish and harvest wild rice. And they lived near the pine forest so they could hunt and they could find materials to build their homes with. I said all of the same things, just like it is in the test notes, but I paraphrased it in another way. And yes, you can do that. That is a great thing to do. Next slide. Answer the question in a complete sentence. Describe one way modern Ojibwe people are keeping alive tradition from long ago. And we learned this about the Dakota also. Many Ojibwe are keeping traditions alive by maple sugaring, wild rice harvesting, speaking the Ojibwe language, and telling their oral history stories. And isn't it wonderful, kids, that we do have people keeping these things alive. These are important things from the past, and I'm so glad that there are Ojibwe that are keeping these traditions alive of maple sugaring, wild rice harvesting, speaking their Ojibwe language, and telling their oral history stories. That way we can all learn about it. Next slide. What did the Ojibwe and Dakota each gain from the peace agreement made around 1689? Well, both tribes were able to live in peace for many, many years and not at war. The Ojibwe were allowed to come in and live and hunt in the Dakota lands, which is now northern Minnesota. And the Dakota now were able to trade with the Europeans for these trade goods they knew that the Ojibwe had. Trade goods being guns and cloth and blankets and metal pots and pans and axes and knives, all of those things. Now our last slide is our bonus. And the bonus is, on a separate sheet of paper, draw some things happening in an Ojibwe summer village and make sure to include housing. Draw a picture of what they lived in. Their food preparation, maybe planting some things, and some fun activities that they did in the summer. And we'll talk more about that as we finish and discuss our chapter. It will be a lot of fun.